you taking your time. We're super excited to have you share your stories.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. I can do a quick intro, but obviously would love to hear it from yourself. So Ime is the head of new product experimentation at Facebook. Previously, he was the VP of product partnerships, and he started his career in technology at IBM, where I believe he was both an IC and eventually sort of moved on to the business side. And he holds an MBA from Stanford, bachelor's degree from Yale. So I guess like the first thing that we can sort of talk about is start at the really just like the beginning. What how did you discover your interest in computer science, software, and technology?
Appreciate it. Yeah, I have a maybe a similar story to probably a lot of folks here, maybe somewhat a dissimilar story, but to know me, you got to know my parents. My parents are Nigerian immigrants and they found their way to the United States. I was born in Kansas of all places, but grew up in North Carolina because my mom decided that when she wanted to, they're both professors, to teach, she really wanted to be routed and kind of grounded in the Black community. So she wanted to find an HBCU. North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro, North Carolina was the place that she started her journey as a professor, and just retired 4 or 5 years ago. After almost 30 years teaching business there. But nonetheless, when you ask about kind of the seeds that were planted for why computer science and electrical engineering is what I ended up studying, was like what I was drawn to. I think a couple different things in retrospect were there. One, I had parents who weren't shy about trying to infuse technology into house into the early age. My first computer was a Commodore 64. I don't know if anyone was old enough or all right. I see at least one hand up, so I don't feel too alone generationally here. Was the first computer that I had in the home, and that was something that just my brother and I got the opportunity to tinker on when we were in middle school and in elementary school. And then back to the combination of like my mom teaching at North Carolina A&T State. It is a technical university. You have a number of people. I don't think I realized it at the time that I grew up in a community of Black and brown engineers and computer scientists and astrophysicists and so on and so forth. So to be like on campus with her and see that day to day, I think that of course was also an inspiring seed for me. And then it all clicked for me when I took AP Comp Sci. I was always like a math and science person, but when I took AP Computer Science in high school, that's when it was like, oh, okay, there's something here. Let me go study this and pursue this path of engineering. And then I should timely insert a nice immigrant kid joke here about you only had the opportunity to be a doctor, engineer, or lawyer, but I'm sure you all have heard that before.
Never,
right? Awesome. And then I guess like how did you get introduced to Facebook, and what convinced you to join Facebook after getting your MBA?
Yeah, I mean, so I started my career at IBM as an engineer, and I was working on storage systems. So I had a good 3 or 4 year run as an engineer writing performance virtualization software for mainframe computers, which just like, I almost put myself to sleep saying it right now, but it was just not a sexy, like inspiring thing for me. And while I was at IBM, switched over to the business side of the house because I was looking for something that was a bit more interesting and exciting. I had this moment when I was at IBM where I was sitting down for lunch one day with a bunch of my colleagues, and I wanted to talk about anything but storage. I was, what's on the news, what's going on in sports. Let's talk about anything but storage at that time. And I lost that battle. Like, the 4 or 5 colleagues that I had just wanted to talk about the industry, wanted to talk about the technology. And I realized that I was like fighting this system. And in fact, I actually had to flip it around and say, I need to go find what they have, right? Like they wake up every single day thinking about storage. They want to talk about it at lunch. They want to go to bed talking about it. Like that's where they've like locked into what they really care about and what really lights them up right now. And I need to go find something similar that will have that for me. I don't know that I was able to pinpoint it at the time, but I think the closest that I got was I actually wanted to focus on consumer technology. I really continue to love the intersection of kind of tech and humanity, and the ability to think about what are the products that could be built and the technology that could be built that actually I could tell my mom about and have her use and put it in my friends and family's hands was something that was pretty important to me. So that's directionally what was leading me towards consumer tech as a space. I was in the Bay Area by the time I finished business school, and I just started bouncing around talking to a bunch of different people who were planning on doing a startup, and IBM was 400,000 people. So in my head, I was like, I just need to go do a startup. I need to go find like 2 or 3 people and get going. And the person who, one of the many people, but one of the persons who I reached out to had just left Google at the time. I had thought he was going to do a small startup. So we were going to kind of powwow and chat about what the opportunities were and what we were excited about. Facebook had scooped him up by then. So by the time we actually sat down for a coffee, instead of a conversation about the startup ecosystem, which we had a little bit of that, he kind of went into, you should think about this place. Let me tell you about why I joined this place. And let me introduce you to a couple other different people. That was almost 11 years ago. So as soon as I got to know some folks, as soon as I understood what the real mission was, as soon as I checked in with myself about what I really cared about, it was just clear alignment. And it's been quite a journey since. I see some old school folks who were at the company at the time on this particular Zoom too. So maybe they could speak to that too. But yeah.
Great. And so you joined Facebook, sort of early 2010s. What was that like atmosphere like? What were sort of like the big changes in those kind of first couple of years when you're at the job?
For me personally, it was a big difference. Again, IBM, 100-year-old company, 400,000 people by the time I left them. My job was to wear slacks every single day as an engineer. They'll tell you enough about the culture. So coming to Facebook, not only was it a big, just, going from 400,000 people to, I think it was around 12, maybe 1,100 people when I joined, culturally very, very different. I was now working with people that were peers that were also in my age range. So as you can imagine, a lot of my colleagues at IBM were probably a generation or two older than me. The office dynamics were very, very different. The fact that we didn't have offices was very, very different. But then over the course of the couple of years that I've been here, it's the explosive growth, right? It's been the rocket ship that we've been on. That's been, I think, the most educational for me and the most exciting and the big difference, right? IBM was flat to declining in terms of headcount and kind of excitement about the company when I was there. And Facebook was just an absolute rocket ship on hiring people that were coming to the company, how the company is growing, what we were building, the diversity of products that we were building, the number of people that were using our products, how much we were in the press. I mean, all of that was a pretty clear shock to the system. There are also some other differences there. I haven't been shy about talking about this my entire journey, but I left IBM and there was really well thought out, robust, like D&I structure at the company. They've had decades to sort this out and have really figured it out and dialed it in. And when I got to Facebook, there was like 5 people that looked like, I don't know if it was 5, but it was probably close to, a few dozen, maybe a dozen or so people that looked like me. And the lack of infrastructure was pretty evident. So it's been one of the things that when I think back about the last decade or so, just putting in some of that infrastructure and putting some intentionality around it as a company and seeing us mature and grow in that dimension has been something that I will look fondly back on.
Definitely, yeah. I do want to touch upon those, kind of topics about D&I, especially with how, startups and big tech companies sort of like approach those topics differently. But I guess like before that, I sort of want to, I guess, like direct the conversation to just talk a little bit about, what MPE is, sort of like why Facebook started that, and I guess like, how you got involved as well.
Yeah. So for folks that don't know, NPE stands for New Product Experimentation. It's a group that exists at Facebook and has been around for maybe 2 years, if we're being generous. The reason why we started it is something that no big company is immune to. So there's good old kind of innovator's dilemma and Clay Christensen and just the ability to move fast. So we have a bunch of different properties right now, which touch, I guess as of last earnings, 3.47 billion people every single month are using one or more of those products. And our ability to do risky, kind of fast, really bold things inside of that product experience is just going to get limited as we serve more and more people. And you have the responsibility to serve them well and not disrupt the experiences and the businesses and the relationships that have been built across those products. So NPE is a depressurized space that gives kind of entrepreneurial full stack teams, think, designer, engineer, product manager in some particular cases, the ability to go and build and launch products in a way that you can put them out there quickly, or maybe not as fast as probably some of these folks are moving because we're still a part of the corporation, but you can put them out there pretty quickly, put them out there underneath an app umbrella that is not a Facebook and Instagram or WhatsApp that has a lot of the pressures that come from having 1 billion plus people. And then the feature, not a bug, is the ability to shut things down fairly quickly. So if you think about Facebook's mission, if you think about what we're trying to do from a product perspective, you think about one of our principles of serving everyone, this notion that we have a team that can put apps out there, learn really quickly. If something takes off, great. Like that's fantastic. In fact, our aspirational goal is to build apps and products and services that can stand alongside Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp one day proudly in our product portfolio. But we know that's going to be the outlier versus the norm. But the norm, hopefully, is we learn a bunch. We learn something that we can then translate back into the next experiment that we take from an NPE perspective, or we learn something that we can infuse into our main apps fairly quickly. And we're on that journey right now. Have a couple of different learnings and lessons that we've won, that we've considered a win, but we're still looking for that breakthrough success, though.
Definitely, yeah. So SPC is like a community full of founders and entrepreneurial type people, and I think one of the big questions that founders often face when they're talking to potential investors or employees is why doesn't Facebook go build this, or why doesn't Twitter go build this? And I feel like with the NPE team, it's often like it does seem a little harder to answer maybe, but I guess sort of leading on to that is I guess what kind of products or what kind of spaces do you think are really suited to be built outside of even like the Facebook NPE ecosystem versus sort of like within that ecosystem, if any?
No, it's a good question. It's a question that I talk to, especially when I'm talking to entrepreneurs that want to build an NPE. One of the things I tend to push them on is that while NPE really is about creating a space for kind of, I call it emergent ideas inside of the Facebook ecosystem to build, and it really is about betting on people and their ideas and their thesis, that there's a couple different kind of theoretical guardrails that we have. One is the idea mission aligned. As you can imagine, there's probably a bunch of different ideas that are pretty compelling businesses, that are pretty compelling products that ultimately don't ladder up to this notion of giving people the power to build community and bringing the world closer together. So there's like a general mission alignment that we're looking to see from the ideas that we build inside of NPE, regardless of how kind of far afield they are from kind of the core stuff that we're doing and that we're building. So that's kind of number one. Number two, which I think is somewhat or sometimes a little bit harder to tease out, but I try to tack to talent and some of the entrepreneurial talent that they really should have a thesis about why building inside of NPE and close to Facebook would give them a strategic advantage than just going in, especially these days, raising money and kind of moving quickly with their own separate team. So to make this a bit more concrete, and part of the reason why after almost 9 years of working on the partnerships and kind of product partnership side of the company, it made sense for me to come and do this work, which was for 9 years, I probably ran around the world talking to, you pick your favorite startup, you pick your favorite consumer company, and help them understand how to leverage Facebook APIs to build something that was way more personal, that was way more social, that had the ability to go viral, so on and so forth. But like that was us as a company bringing through our APIs and through our platform Facebook superpowers to products, to startups, to consumer tech companies to build something that was interesting, and we've helped a number of them grow over time. I could talk to you and share with you stories about the 17-person Spotify team that I met, or the 4-person Tinder team that I met at one time, or the 30-person like Zynga team. Some of these folks know some of these stories too as well. But the real question is now, can we do that internally, right? i.e., is there a space that we create for the same type of entrepreneurial talent and folks that have kind of a big, bold, ambitious vision, but have some sub thesis that they could do it bigger, better, more exciting, be more successful if they are able to tackle and use some of Facebook's superpowers to do so. So I try to look for theses along those particular dimensions. And, if you can't really articulate the latter, it probably makes more sense to be built outside of definitely Facebook and NPE.
Got it. Awesome. And yeah, I'm sure people would love to hear some of those stories about the Spotify and the Tinders. And so,
Early days.
feel free to ask those sort of like later on in the open floor Q&A.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like on those lines, what are some of the like kind of most valuable lessons that you've learned running the NPE team, working with these businesses and such?
Learning every day. Let's put it that way. Some of the fun part of this particular job has been the ability to bounce around the world, and then also to a bunch of different industries. So not just tech industries, for folks who have tried to build similar organizations inside of big corporations, and just like swapping lessons and hearing, what has gone well and what hasn't gone so well, and trying to learn from that and pull from that. Maybe I'll offer the 3 principles that we have and that we codified after many of those interviews. The first is like, this is a bet on people more so than anything else, right? From a company perspective, we have, tens of thousands of people that have to work on tops down ideas, right? It's like what's happening in Mark's head, or Chris Cox, who's our chief product officer's head, Shrep, who's our CTO, or kind of any of the product group leaders around the organization. It's a wonderful place, but also that's like a tops down thing. So with NPE, what we're really doing is they're taking a bet on people. Like, we have a deep belief that small teams, and we've seen it time and time again, can have outsized impact and have outsized value if they're focused, if they're driven, if they're scrappy enough, if they're hungry enough, and they have the resources and the runway to do things. So it's a bet on people. That's kind of number one, first and foremost. The second thing I'd probably say is, like, I tend to talk about proximity a lot. I want to bet on proximity. And the way I describe proximity is that particular person or that team that we're betting on, they are disproportionately more proximate to the opportunity or the problem or the challenge that they're trying to solve with, their particular solution. Proximity comes in a bunch of different forms, i.e. like, the people. Today is Africa Day, which is the reason why I got my Nigeria kit on, and I was speaking at a company event earlier today. The people that are in Lagos, Nigeria, are way more proximate to opportunities that exist across the continent than the folks here on the 101 traveling on a white bus up and down Silicon Valley every single day. So I want to bet on those people for ideas and for opportunities that I think could be unlocked across the African continent. Proximity can also come in the form of just people who are more intellectually or academically like curious and close to particular problem spaces or areas. But I look for that ingredient of proximity. And then the last lesson that I'd say that I learned is we have to have patience for some of this stuff. You all know, as you're building teams, that if you pull the right people in order to try to tackle and solve a problem, hopefully that team is going to be fairly diverse. And with that diversity, you're going to have some friction, but that friction is ultimately what's going to lead to actually creating a better product. But you have to have a little bit of patience to live with that friction. It's a lot easier to hire monolithic thinking folks and moving pretty rapidly. But I actually do believe that will lead to subpar outcomes. So you have to have a patience for just the friction of the early stage building, the ups and downs, the highs and lows, which all of you know probably even more intimately than I do. And then you have to have patience for the bold, ambitious, big ideas. This finding lightning in a bottle is not something that happens every single day. And the ability and the patience to actually invest in a good idea and a good thesis over time is, what a well-resourced place like Facebook affords NPE, which is fantastic and a privilege.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Great. Awesome. And I guess one final question about MP before we move on to some other topics is, I know lately with sort of in the social tech world, Clubhouse has been making a lot of moves, and it's almost like every company from Discord to Twitch, and they're all sort of trying to come up with their own versions or competitors to Clubhouse. And so MP has this product called Hotline, which I think they pitch as sort of like a Twitch meets Clubhouse, with the video component, And so the question to you is, what do you think Clubhouse really nailed in terms of like, the virality kind of component? And then what do you think are the missing needs that sort of Hotline is trying to meet that Clubhouse currently can't?
And it's a good question in terms of like what they nailed. Like the trend was right. This is one of the, if I'm like, yes, NPE was onto it, about 2 years ago, even before Paul and Rohan started talking about what they were doing with Clubhouse, we too had a thesis around audio as a format. So if you go back to some of the NPE, I'm not going to call it the NPE graveyard, but let's say like the NPE, like, hall of pivots, you'll probably find 7 to 8 different product experiences that we built that were focused on audio format. And it's mainly not because we felt like we didn't know the pandemic was coming. Let's put it that way, right? But there was someone here who had a thesis that was just like, all of my friends are wearing ear pods right now and wearing hearables. This is going to be ubiquitous. There's going to be kind of audio first experiences that need to be built. Let's go try and experiment a bunch of different things. Where we fell flat, or sorry, I'm not gonna say where we fell flat, what we learned is that our bias towards kind of the social graph kind of maybe kicked us in the shin on this particular one, because the product that we launched around the same time called Catch Up as Clubhouse was more focused on your immediate social graph, your friends and family, like our Facebook DNA and kind of what we know pretty well. And then hat tip to Paul and Rohan and the kind of the Clubhouse team. I think that they really focused on that early like influencer, graph, and trying to build, started with Twitter and tech, and then kind of moving from there, but really focused on the celebrity use case and kind of interesting, unique content conversations that you could have as opposed to your friends and family. So over the course of 2020, and then with the pandemic happening, just kind of rode that wave. So I think that's fantastic. Where I think that they are focused now, which is great to see, but also where the Hotline team, as you would imagine, has been building for a little while, saw the opportunity was really to focus on the experience for creators or the host. I think Clubhouse and a bunch of other folks have done a pretty good job on the community and making sure that it's a space where folks that are coming to consume content have a really good experience and interesting experience. But we felt like there were some gaps on the creator side, i.e., can somebody come and really have the tools to be in control of the room that they open up, or the community that they put in, that they're putting together, and the conversations that they're having. So Hotline, as you see it continue to pivot and put more and more products out there, it's mainly going to be around like, what are the creator pain points that we can go and try to solve, and that we can unlock for value for that particular cohort.
Mm-hmm. Right. And there's sort of been like I guess like a lack of social startup innovation over the past, only recently has it really started to break up, but in the past maybe 4 or 5 years, it was kind of slow. And so what do you think I guess like really changed during that, maybe besides like the pandemic? And then do you have any advice for founders who are sort of thinking about creating things for social use cases?
Yeah, I mean, it's the pandemic is an example of it, but I think at the highest level, just like people's expectations around social have really, really shifted, right? And I felt this fairly acutely here at Facebook for the last 5 years or so. But just the social responsibility, the social norms, the dynamics, the expectations around privacy and control and data, like I think society has moved quite a bit over the course of the last decade, and how we think about that. So I think there's a real opportunity around that. We started as a company talking about private social networks are, what we're going to be thinking about in the future. And I think that that's like one trend that anyone who's thinking about social right now can think about. I think Andrew over at Andreessen has that great blog, right? Like what's he call it? Like Social Strikes Back, or Social Plus Strikes Back, where he talks about the different verticals that social is primed to actually disrupt, and innovation is primed to happen in. And that's everything from finance. We clearly saw some interesting stuff over the course of 2020, and the Robin Hood Reddit takes on the market space. But I think there are a lot of verticals right now that social does have an opportunity to amplify, disrupt, change a little bit, and there's some thesis there. So it's really around people's expectations and how that's shifted and how that's evolved. I think the other vector, which is something that all of you know and probably are thinking about too, which is just like technology has allowed us to do so much more, and will continue to allow us to do so much more. So anyone who's geeking out on kind of new platforms in the future of platforms like VR and AR, there's probably opportunities and massive opportunities there. I do think mobile devices, there's a lot of runway left on products and experiences that can be built on mobile, but everything from the advances in AI to increased compute power to, people continuing to get more and more online, there's just more opportunities to build interesting things. There's also just gaps that some of these big social companies are missing right now. The one that I, will highlight and talk about is I've always been a fan of of the ShareChat story. I don't know if anyone's familiar with ShareChat, India social network. Yes, no, I don't see any nodding heads. I think hundreds of millions of people use ShareChat right now. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's upwards of that. And the only innovation that they did, it's pretty basic social media platform, is because they were proximate to local languages in India. They said, we are going to ignore English and we are just going to optimize this thing for local language. And of course, in a country of over 1 billion people, people who are connected to the local languages, you're talking hundreds of millions fairly quickly, and they've done a pretty good job of just executing on that. So people's expectations, technology, and unique opportunities that the big companies right now are probably missing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots of good points. And so I guess before we open it up to the Q&A, I think one topic I want to talk to you about is related to D&I, right? Like you earlier you mentioned that when you first came to Facebook, you saw there was some things that could be improved, and also that the IBM had years and years of experience trying to tackle these types of problems. What do you think a lot of these tech companies maybe don't get right about D&I? And then what do you think early stage founders, early stage startups should be doing for D&I kind of initiatives? And then also how their kind of strategies might differ from big tech companies?
All good questions. What do people get wrong? Well, this is necessarily, I'm not going to hold people's feet to the fire on this one, but I feel like it's just one of these things that should be embedded. This is a Facebook story that most folks know, which is, for a while, when I joined the company, we had a mobile team. There was like a 13-person or a 10-person team that was like working on mobile because everything was desktop. And it took us like a pretty interesting smack in the face to realize that mobile needs to be like something that everybody's thinking about and doing, because it is the future. And we had to train hundreds of engineers over the course of many months in order to make sure that we were a mobile first company. I think for anyone who is thinking D&I right now is like a centralized thing that a small pocket of team should be thinking about for the entire company, is probably getting it wrong. Like, it needs to be decentralized. It needs to be embedded and ingrained into every single function, whether it's HR to engineering. Everyone needs to be thinking about it in some way, shape, or form. So that's kind of one thing that I would say people are probably still, if people are still in a centralized fashion thinking about D&I, they're probably missing the mark. In terms of the early stage, the mistake, I'm not going to call it a complete mistake, but the mistake that I think that I made in the early days of Facebook was to not go harder at recruiting. It sounds trivial, and it is really like, it is like D&I like 101, maybe even like before whatever 101 is. But at the early stage of any particular company, if you are so blessed with hyper growth, if you don't get it right then, actually trying to catch up later is it's almost an impossible task. It feels like an almost impossible task. So if you're a 5-person team, a 10-person team, a 50-person team, going really, really, really hard to ensure that you are hiring folks that come from a diverse perspective, I think is probably the number one thing that you can do. So that would be my hardcore steer. Everything else will flow after that. Then you talk about retention, you talk about growing talent, everything along senior level talent, like all of that will take care of itself if you can get the hiring right at the early stages. It requires patience, right? Which is what I talked about a little bit earlier, but it requires a little bit of patience.
Got it. Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much for sharing these stories, and yeah, I would love to open it up to open floor Q&A. I know Nadia, Kyle, Ola, all of you have really great questions in the chat, so feel free to ask away.
I can jump in. This is like so interesting and exciting. So big thank you. I guess like one of my questions is I'm curious, like what have you seen in terms of indicators when a new product is working sort of really well? Like what are those like bright spots to look for versus products or technologies, or maybe you and the team internally are really excited, but it's actually like not resonating as much? And I guess I'm curious, like, are there sort of superpowers or things that you've learned to look for that maybe entrepreneurs should be looking for, but don't commonly in sort of those early stages?
Yeah, I mean, so we're all learning through this. I mean, again, what I say is over the course of a decade, my hope is that we can look back and write the case study on NPE. And a big piece of that is going to be like, hey, we had the wisdom to identify when something is working, when something's not working, and like the strength and the fortitude to shut stuff down quickly and efficiently, which I think is the trap that a lot of people can fall into. I would say right now, we are, and this may be a reaction to what would be easy DNA for us, Nadia, which is, let's find something that we can grow really, really quickly, right? Like we want to see the pop in the app store. We want to, we want something to go viral pretty quickly and yada, yada, yada. But we have enough lessons at this company of what happens when you throw gasoline on a product that isn't retentive, that you actually can't clearly articulate what the job it is doing for a particular, for anyone. Or if you did articulate what job you thought it was doing, and then you ask the people who are actually using it, they tell you something completely different and you're solving a completely different problem. So those are the signs that we're looking for in these early days. You all know that it's every bit as much of science as it is a little bit of magic and creativity, but we try to make sure that we are solving a job for a particular person. I tell the team, show me one person that loves what you've built. Okay, now show me 10 people. Now show me, it's just the power of tens. Now show me 100, now show me 1,000, so on and so forth. Because we know we can grow something over time. But real question is it solving a problem? Is it something that people love? The team has, and I think this may be a bit more cultural than anything, and we're bottoms up culture, so we let people evolve how they're thinking. The team has loved kind of using Sean Ellis scores and the ability to ask people, hey, if we were to take away this product, would you care or not? And they use that from a qualitative standpoint a lot to understand whether what they've built is working or not. And then in terms of just like hardcore data science and measurement, we try to get teams to focus a little bit more on retention, more so than anything else, because we know that we do have the mechanisms and the means at this company to grow stuff over time. So a little bit of a luxury of not having to worry about hyper growth way too early. And then also we have the luxury about not worrying about how are we going to turn this into a business? Like we will figure that out, but we really want to make sure that we're solving a people problem.
That's so helpful. Thank you. I have like so many questions, but I want to let Kyle and other folks ask their questions too. Tamina, I know you guys have great questions.
Yeah. Again, thanks a lot for coming and kind of doing this talk with us. I'm just really curious about whether like how you go about kind of thinking about keeping folks motivated and aligned in terms of incentives within the org that's within NPE. So I guess like a very concrete example of this is I'm curious whether NPE had like either does implement or has considered implementing a different sort of comp structure for its employees that's different than what you see for the rest of Facebook.
Great question. So it's funny, NPE for me is both helping teams at the product level build products and try to see if that actually works. Kyle, what you're alluding to is like NPE as a system. And there's a large part of reasons why a lot of these systems haven't historically worked in corporations. There are like 7 different vectors that I'm constantly playing with, but one of them, it really is to think about the incentive system right now. We have not yet to date done anything unique from a comp perspective. So as the entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial talent come in, what we're really doing is we're de-risking the downside, right? There's some positives there. I think there's also some negatives there, right? So oftentimes it is that downside risk that fuels the like passion and the push to really actually find something that's going to work and the hard work that people put forward. So you have to figure out how to balance that out. But we're de-risking the downside for them. In terms of the upside, in terms of building carrots, these are conversations that are ongoing right now. And we don't have anything specific or unique right now for a number of different reasons. I told you I had a bunch of different conversations with people who have run similar organizations across a bunch of different industries. And one thing that's pretty clear is every attempt to try to replicate market forces inside of a corporation don't quite work. So people that try to play with equity and You know, if you build something and then you have to get it acquired by one of the big product groups inside of the organization, like all of that stuff ends up being pretty messy, and it'll never replicate having Google or Facebook or Amazon trying to bid for your particular product. So trying to figure out the right bespoke thing to do for the community of entrepreneurs in NPE is one of the next kind of levers and chapters that I'm working on right now. So it's a great question.
I guess I can jump in real quick. I was kind of curious about, you talk about betting on people, and I think I really appreciate that strategy, but I do find that it's somewhat risky in regard to biases, and you know, people have not had an opportunity to prove themselves in the right ways. How do you think about navigating that? I mean, are there ways for people to explicitly sort of prove themselves out, or are you kind of looking at their track record in certain ways? How do you avoid, you know, the subjective nature of that bet, basically?
So I'm one of those people that believes that we're all biased. The question is whether we understand it and where our biases lie, and trying to course correct and counter those are pretty important. So just being cognizant of the bias that's going to creep into how we hire and how we think about talent is something that is ultimately top of mind for me. If you were to look at the NPE team now, awesome group, love them. And if you were to put a bias brush on it, you'd be like, you're trying to tell me that all innovators and startup people probably have at some point worked at one of the big FANG companies, or they're like all in the United States. Like there's a whole bunch of things that, you know, we're course correcting for, and we're thinking about a little bit differently as we continue to get smart and wise on this stuff. But I agree with you, the betting on people does put the risk for bias, and there's risk there. The ways that we're trying to vet folks, I can maybe talk to one of the internal things that we're doing, which is, when I took over NPE and we decided that we as a company were really going to invest in this, as you can imagine, across the tens of thousands of people who already work at Facebook, I started to get, if I'm being generous at the height, probably 2 to 3 internal pitches from people every single week. And it was just like hey, hire me. I've wanted to work on this forever. Like, here's my idea. Here's my pitch deck. And the thing that I wanted to eradicate was like the bias towards someone who had the sexy pitch deck, or was like the marketing professional, could talk the talk, could sell somebody on like an idea. You know, that's an important part of entrepreneurship, but you all know it is not probably even the most important piece of entrepreneurship. So instead of entertaining pitch decks and ideas from internal candidates, what we ended up doing is we have folks who have worked at Facebook knows we have a pretty deep culture of hackathons, and using that as the funnel, which is like, cool, thanks for sending this idea over. It sounds great. I don't want to spend any more time debating on whether it's a good idea or not. If you truly are the entrepreneur or have the entrepreneurial mindset that you claim to have, you know, we got these hackathons like every month, every other month. Go do the entrepreneurial hustle thing and find 4 or 5 other people that want to build this with you over the course of like 2 days or so. Let's look at the prototype together. But like, that is almost my first filter of getting people from ideas to actually like, who wants to like roll up their sleeves and do the work. And then we can have a debate on the backside about that, whether I give them the runway, the space, and the resources and the time to go and build out and flesh out that idea. It's worked to date so far, but again, we're 2 years into this journey. And again, my hope is 5 years from now, I can tell some pretty awesome, powerful stories of how everything has worked out perfectly and we knew it all along. And, you know, so, but yeah, another good question though, Jared, I appreciate it.
Ola, I think you're up next in the question queue. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Hi, Ime.
Hola.
I'm pretty sure we have talked about this before, not sure, but when you were talking about catch-up, you mentioned that as you guys were exploring audio, one of the issues you had was you looked at it from the social graph perspective. How do you deal with the inherent bias that comes from thinking about things from the Facebook, Instagram worldview, where the social graph is like a big part of how Facebookers always think about the world? And how do you hope to deal with that as you try to explore new things?
Yeah, this is funny. This will somewhat bridge back to Jared's question on 2 dimensions. So 1, the bias is there. Like that is the reason why, in my opinion, we dropped the ball on that one, which is just like, we know social graph, we know friends and family. We've seen the recipe work so many times and so many other different products in a very successful way. that's our bet, that's our bet, that's our bet. No, by the way, it's not a crazy one, right? Like, again, the thesis for that particular product was, if we can get this right with a small group, then we actually do know that we can plug in some interesting way to the broader social graph. And that could be a way and a path towards distribution, because distribution is one, of course, the hardest nuts to crack here in the early stages. There was a bias there. And I think that learning the lesson the hard way is, again, a story that we'll take forward with us and ensure that as we continue to move forward. And then back to Jared's question, hiring talent is hopefully one way to counterbalance that bias. So I just spoke about the funnel that we have for one of our particular NPE pillars called the hack pillar. And that's to take kind of internal folks who want to build an entrepreneurial way and put them through the filter and really have them build this way. We are hiring externally a bunch. And if anything, if I had it my way, 80% of the folks that are building inside of NPE will be and should be kind of net new to the company, i.e. they come in with a totally different perspective. To your point, they haven't seen 10 plus years of the social graph or understood how Facebook's built. And they're willing to challenge the status quo and build outside of the status quo. And that's the big hope. The second bias, or the second layer of that I'm trying to counterbalance, I think that we've talked about this potentially too, is getting us out of Silicon Valley. Right now, NPE is geographically distributed, but it's not geographically distributed in the way that I think that we should be, and I think that we have the opportunity to be. So we're here in Menlo Park, where I'm sitting right now, San Francisco, Seattle, New York, LA, and then these days you got like random people in like North Carolina, wherever people hid for the pandemic. But I think we need to be overseas. We need to be where people are seeing different opportunities, where people have different needs, to be honest with you. And that can be everywhere from Korea to Nigeria to Eastern Europe to Brazil, and so on and so forth. So I am moving forward with trying to attract and work with more international talent that I think will come with less of the bias and the understanding of how not just Facebook works and the social graph, but less of how Silicon Valley works. Because there's billions of people that don't have it. Yeah.
I'll jump in. My question was about whether NPE has been able to venture more into social impact spaces than some of the more established product teams. And I think, the question is motivated by there being learning opportunities. In particular, you can experiment with outcomes other than retention, maybe outcomes in the physical world that also matter. So curious what the exposure has been.
Love it. Yeah, I talk about, the answer is yes. I talk about this a lot, which is I want NPE to be solving real people kind of needs or opportunities. I use sometimes maybe rightfully so or not use Maslow's hierarchy there. But I also talk about the societal benefits of what technology can bring and how we can do more there. I penned a note at the company 3 or 4 years ago. I called it Project 17. A lot of it was due to, I was a mentor at Unreasonable. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Unreasonable Institute. Yeah. And they had a cohort of people that were focused on the Sustainable Development Goals, the global goals of 2030. And my whole thesis when I wrote this note was, like everyone's asking, especially at that time, is Facebook good? I mean, people are still asking this question, is Facebook good for the world or not? And I found myself debating a lot with people on, first and foremost, like what good was and what good looks like. And there are very few definitions that the 8 billion people across the world all agree to what good looks like. But the global goals are at least a set of goals. If you guys are familiar, the UN in 2015, ratified, I think 180 countries unanimously ratified 17 global goals that effectively said by 2030, if we can work towards these goals, the world will have been a better place for all of us. And we kind of all collectively, the world collectively agreed to that. So I was like, there's a list of goals right there that no one's necessarily going to deny isn't good. How can we as a company take stock of what we're doing right now and figure out which of those things ladder up to these goals and try to do more of that? Or where are opportunities to do more for these goals and to invest in those particular spaces. So one of the things that I'm pretty excited about that the NPE team is doing is you do have people that are focused on areas and spaces that ladder up to those goals. And we have the ability to flex kind of product muscle and thinking on that. One of the goals talks about equity, if you're familiar with them. We have an entrepreneur who talk about proximity. Her and her partner are trying to have a family, and they realized how bad family planning was for the LGBTQ community. Their product primarily is focused in a really opinionated way on how do we actually make the family planning process better for that particular community. We have a team that has talked about how broken the professional experience is for Black women. And you probably all know the data and stats of how much they get paid vis-a-vis, their white peers. So they have a product, their product thesis is just like, somehow, some way technology can kind of help close this like economic gap for Black women. And like, that is their opinionated approach, but it all ladders up to some of this equity stuff. But we'll have more and more teams. I could keep going on and on and on about some of the teams that are building some stuff, but we do have a nice portfolio of folks that are trying to do stuff that are driving real societal benefit, which I'm excited about. And yes, a part of my note from a couple of years ago was like, what if we weren't just worried about these particular product metrics and we changed our metrics to more align with some of these societal outcomes, and let's see what happens. So.
I guess I'll hop right in. Thank you so much for sharing so much with us. I had a question, which is basically, I was curious to know if at any point of time, an idea that came up or pitch deck that came up just totally blew your mind or redefined expectations of what experimentation was for NPE.
My job is to hold like space, not to get too excited, and like anchor in on the thesis of identify a big problem, a problem that we both mutually agree that's going to grow over time. Let's not debate about what your initial potential solution is for that particular problem, but just go build it. Go build it, put it in real people's hands. So that's like the magic of NPE, which is, we as a company have all the resources to do, months and months, if not even years of research if we really wanted to make sure that we got the exact thing right that we were going to do. NPE is a space for folks that are really biased towards building to avoid doing all of that and actually just get to work and build and ship something and put it in people's hand. And then I want to have on the backside of it, actually like being in people's hands, the debate on whether it's blowing our minds or whether it's not blowing our minds. Have there been pitch decks that I've been really excited about? I mean, the answer is yes. There's a couple of different problem areas and spaces that I've been obsessed with for a number of years now. So anyone who knows my emotional bias towards those problems, the ideas that they surface and the pitch decks that they surface tend to get me pretty excited. But my real job is to hold space and not to get too excited on the upfront and get excited once something's actually in people's hands and we see how people are using it.
Ime, this is fantastic. I'll ask a provocative question in the spirit of shaking things up. What would it take for you to leave Facebook? I feel like you've had an incredible run there, but there are so many interesting things happening outside Facebook and the tech ecosystem and also outside the tech ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even a provocative. I like provocative questions, by the way, but let me go ahead because this is family right now. So I've almost left Facebook twice over the course of my 11 years. One was a pretty unique opportunity. I'm early in my time at Facebook. I didn't go into this part of my background, but I've been a sports guy kind of my life and played a lot of basketball. So had a really unique opportunity to go lead one of the NBA basketball teams. It blew up for a number of different reasons, and that's a whole nother story. If you're interested in that, I can tell you that story, but I'm glad I didn't, because I actually think that the sports industry is kind of like nutty and crazy, and like the ability to have impact is a little bit different than what we can do from a text perspective. The other time was I was really excited about the overlap between technology and the sports world, and there was a big sports company that was trying to get deeper into tech, into digital technology, and there was something very seductive about it. With that said, and this is now this is the heuristic that I use today, and this will answer your question about what it would take. At this point in my career, when I think about how I want to spend my time professionally or just spend my time on the world, I try to answer the question like what I care about. And back to this, I guess we started here with the IBM question, like what I would wake up every single day, like obsessed talking about, what I would like go to lunch talking about, and what I'd go to bed talking about. And once I get clarity on that, because this will arguably change as you evolve as a human being, I then ask the question right after that, which is, okay, if that's what I care about right now as I stand here, what is the best way to go work on those problems or work on those ideas? Is it raising some money and finding a couple other people that are excited about that space and going and building something new? Or is there an organization that exists right now that's working on that would be a better platform to build from? And for the last 11 years, when I've gone through this exercise, Facebook has actually like continued to come up on that. So again, the second time that I almost left was there was a space and a problem space that I was really interested in doing. And once I got past the like, ooh, big shiny, like other things, like giving me the opportunity to work on this and said, who else is trying to work on this problem and where can I actually work on this problem with like the most leverage and scale? It was to stay with a tech company and to do it from a tech company. So like there's an element of that. The last thing that I would offer, especially because this is maybe not a question that's completely relevant to this audience, because many of you are working on your own things in a smaller place, which is if you make the decision to do it at an organization that you yourself have not started, the question is within that organization, is there opportunity for you to sit in a seat somewhere where you are uniquely situated to sit in that seat? So I'll say that again, it's a little bit of a luxury, but like you are uniquely situated to sit in that seat, because otherwise, why are you there, right? If you are uniquely situated to sit in that seat, then that problem that you care about, which is the first thing that you're answering for yourself, you have the opportunity to drive more impact towards that problem or that area, space, or whatever it is than you would otherwise. That's kind of number one. Number two, maybe this ladders back to Kyle's question to some extent, which is the incentives that like the value that you can create and then the value that you can capture also should be maximized if you are in a unique seat, because that organization also recognizes your uniqueness at that point, right? And then you'll have more fun. You'll feel valuable, like you'll see the demonstrable impact that you're having on not only the problem that you care about, but the organization that you're part of on a day-to-day basis. And it's just like that is the three questions that I ask myself at any given time. And if the answer to that middle question is like Facebook is not the right place to do it, that's where I would get dislodged. But right now I'm good though. It's a great question.
Got it. Thank you so much. I loved the way you think about this as maybe an everlasting question and not something
Absolutely.
yeah, thank you very much.
100%. Tomorrow something happen and like, oh, I need to dedicate my life towards whatever, so this is an evolution.
I have a question, digging a little bit more into that NPE external perspective. For some context and background, I've been both on the startup side, early stage companies, as well as my own company, and then successfully launched products through an internal NPE organization with a larger company at Capital One. So I'm super curious.
Oh. I'm on the Capital One board as of recently.
Yeah, I saw that. I was like, that's awesome. We should talk about that. But yeah, I wanted to dig deeper into that because I've seen various challenges from both of those sides. But can you talk more about what kinds of signals that you look for from those external hires? So is it prototypes, like the internal hires, like the team that they put together? What are the kind of qualities that you think about? Because I might have some people to send your way.
Yeah, I mean, selfishly, if I was thinking about that as you mentioned that, I was like, if at some point any of you guys want to work together, let's talk. Or if you know anybody, because what you probably know from your Cap One days, or if you know anything about these types of organizations, is that the flow of talent is an important component and part of the system to make it a healthy, thriving, sustainable system over the course of a decade or so. So we're constantly on like, okay, who's, and this maybe answer your question, like, who's built something, clearly is behaving entrepreneurial, maybe it didn't work out, but like they have the hunger and the desire to go after it again. And if we gave them the resources to actually, and the time to do it, they would potentially come up with something. So we look for, yes, signals like that. Like, is there an entrepreneurial spirit? Is there a founder mindset behind the people that we end up hiring? A big piece of that is being able to like sell us on a pretty interesting and ambitious vision, right? And I think it's particularly important because at the end of the day, by design, this organization should be doing things that make the company, I say this, being at Cap One and having done this at Cap One, it's a kind of an interesting dance. But
yeah,
I say if my team is not making the company uncomfortable, then we're not doing
it wrong.
yeah. I'm not doing my job. We're not really innovating, right?
Yeah.
If a product group leader at the company can look at what NPE is doing and immediately says, oh, I understand every single thing that's happening in there, then we're not doing our job. There should be some stuff in our portfolio that's like, why are you doing that? Like, that's the type of like response that we're trying to elicit from teams. So I look for kind of the bold, ambitious idea. I would also say a big piece of that, and this goes to your question around team, is people magnets, like people who are talent magnets, people who, when you hire them, we've hired some people in NPE, and it's been amazing to see the line of people that want to work with them. So there's something pretty unique and special about the folks that are talent magnets that we also look for. And there's a couple other set of criteria that we have a list that we try to hire for, but those are some of the high level ones that I just might offer you.
Okay, that's super helpful. Yeah, I would love to follow up and chat a little bit more. I also know some folks that have worked on the sustainable development goals, but from a slightly different perspective. So I really would be curious to dig in as well, because there's some like climate related ones or other ones, and I don't know if that's relevant to NPE at Facebook, but that type of mindset might be an interesting one too. So like have a person come in and explore the way to do that with data analytics or other aspects. So.
Exactly. Yeah, I would love that. I don't know if it's through Jimmy or Diddy or whomever it is, but getting you all access to my information, and I'm happy to share with you kind of what we're looking for, because again, I think about this as a global good again, right? Like back to a big company that cares about, the mission that we're going after, and the opportunity for talented people who have bold ambitions of how to actually help, bring the world closer together and help people build community in fun and delightful ways. I say that there's a bunch of vitamins that we can add to people's lives, but there's also a bunch of painkillers that we can build for people's lives. And and there's room and there's space for both, but it's a pretty unique opportunity with the resources of Facebook to do that stuff. So definitely want to talk to folks that are excited about that.
Thanks so much for sharing more about that.
In the last minute that we have, can we hear the NBA story? Please.
Okay, I'll do this one really quickly. So for folks who are NBA fans, Ola, I know you're an NBA fan, so you remember this drama. It was, I think, 2014-15 when the Sacramento Kings were for sale here in the Bay Area. Remember that? Okay. And there was a group from Seattle that includes Steve Ballmer, a gentleman named Chris Hansen, who was a hedge fund folk down here, the Nordstrom twins, so of Nordstrom's, but also Seattle kind of natives. And then a gentleman, actually, I think they're still a part of a team trying to bring a team back to Seattle. Any event, they were trying to bring the Seattle Supersonics back to Seattle. They've been hurting since they left for OKC, over a decade ago. And the Kings was the opportunity. Not to bring you too into the fold of the NBA drama, but there was essentially a bake-off between that group and then also a local Bay Area group that consisted of some startup folks, and then the mayor of Sacramento, who was Kevin Johnson, an NBA legend. We thought things were going our way. Bags were packed. And then I learned via the ticker on SportsCenter that Kevin Johnson and the team, it's pretty cold. It was pretty cold. Like I had like text from Ballmer that was like, get ready, like this is a done deal, only to see on SportsCenter that David Stern and them had decided to go with the Sacramento folks. So again, in retrospect, I would have much rather have been doing what I've been doing for the last 7+ years with Facebook and in Silicon Valley and in this industry than trying to wine and dine people and selling some more sweets. The world works out in good ways for us.
Awesome. Well, I think we are at time, but Ime, thank you so much again for taking the time to chat with us. I'm sure we all loved the conversation, and look forward to inviting you back again.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. Good to see everybody, and absolutely figure out how to connect us all. I'd love to stay in touch with folks.
Definitely. Take care.
Thanks, Jimmy. Bye.